I know. Everybody.
I knew Jill and Linda were not coming, and Joanne texted me that her husband had a colonoscopy this afternoon, that was Melody. And he was wanting to go out to dinner afterwards.
Oh my God.
Hungry. So she had thought it was in the morning, and, but it was afternoon, so, there comes Melody. And
There's here. I ever remember. Oh, it's food day. Every Tuesday,
And the Garcias may show up, so, they usually. She didn't text me that they weren't coming, so.
All depends on your babies.
That's right. How both are doing, yeah.
Were they? Mary Catherine brought the kids up to the choir room in the process.
Oh.
I mean, now who was in this with? Sweet.
Oh.
And, Adeline was just, she was just having holding court.
Yes.
She was all
How nice, how cute.
Reminds me of the current 7-year-old, but I have a new 18-year-old.
Oh, whoa. Are you okay?
Am I okay?
Yeah.
You wanna know how okay I am? Like, look out world. Oh my gosh.
Oh, my goodness, she's beautiful. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know.
Found my Aunt Elizabeth.
That's a yes. Oh.
Yeah, it's like, oh.
Beautiful, gorgeous.
As, I mean, from here, I can tell.
Yeah.
They're a little bit. That's okay.
All right, I think that we need to get started. Say Kevin and Rob may show up, we'll see. But I think this is us tonight, so let's open with a word of prayer. Holy and gracious God, we thank you for this gorgeous weather. Even though there's pollen all around us, the warmth of the season and the reminders of new birth and flowers and the beauty of fresh buds on the trees remind us of your creative power. Be with us this night as we look at the wisdom of Proverbs and the wisdom in Job and see what it is that you want us to remember this night from these important Old Testament books. Thank you, God, for being present with us and be with those who are not with us tonight, and especially those who are not feeling well. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. All right, just a reminder that we're in wisdom literature, and there are 3 books that are known as wisdom literature: Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. And of course, we've already done Ecclesiastes. But those 3 books are very different, as you have seen. They portray different issues related to wisdom. Ecclesiastes asks the existential questions about life and death. Proverbs collected wisdom sayings and defines wisdom in general. And then Job deals with the question of suffering. So they're dealing with 3 different things, but all are related to wisdom. Wisdom in ancient Israel and early Judaism includes at least 6 important elements: knowledge, imagination, discipline, piety, order, and moral instruction.
Can you start that statement?
Start the statement. 6 important elements: knowledge, imagination, discipline, piety, order, and moral instruction.
And what is that describing?
The 6 different elements of wisdom
Okay.
in ancient Israel and early Judaism. And we see several of those in Job, and we see other ones in Proverbs, and we saw some of those in Ecclesiastes. Wisdom literature was used to form character and the moral life in early Jewish and Christian communities. They're not just words, but these are thoughts that shaped the life of the community and the individuals in the process. The sages derived their understanding of God, reality, and human existence from 3 sources: natural reason and the power of observation, which we do up to; the gift of divine wisdom that provided the means to reason and think, so the ability to reason and think; and then also the wisdom tradition that was inherited from wise ancestors. So we're going to start by looking at Proverbs. Proverbs is a collection of collections. They're little poems that reflect on common elements of human experience. It's basically the instruction in the art of living well. Most Proverbs are meant to be pondered one at a time, so reading it the way we did is kind of hard. It's a little different. But it was really oral literature that circulated by word of mouth. Many people would say they were just common sayings. Like you may have some wisdom sayings that your parents passed on to you, that you passed down to others, but they're sayings that ponder life together in the presence of God. The purpose of the book of Proverbs is to teach wisdom. So speech in all human speech directed to humans. God is never said to speak in Proverbs. These are not God's words. And the mighty acts of God are never mentioned, which is different from all the other books that we've looked at. But they are things that talk about the way that we relate to one another within the covenant community. The definition of Proverbs is that a proverb is a winged word outliving the fleeting moment. I like the definition. A winged word outliving the fleeting moment. Now, the Hebrew word that's behind Proverbs is mashal, and it means a comparison.
Did you spell that?
Mashal. Mashal. It's a comparison or a likeness. That's one of the things you see in a lot of Proverbs. They're either a comparison or a likeness. The book was originally called the Proverbs of Solomon. Probably, in reality, not all were written by Solomon. As you saw, I think, when you see the different collections, some of those collections come from other people. So obviously, they didn't all come from Solomon. But the Proverbs, the wisdom of the people. Many of the Proverbs uphold the values of the peasant culture, not necessarily the royal culture. But these are kind of commonplace wisdom. They may have arisen to preserve a way of life that was beginning to be endangered by the monarchy. But many may have been collected during the peaceful reign of Solomon by the court sages. So, and we'll look at those collections and talk about them in just a minute. But chapters 10 to 29 are the oldest material, maybe during the monarchy. And that's where you find many of what we commonly think of as Proverbs. Chapters 1 through 9, and then 31, 10 through 31, are dated to after the Babylonian exile. And they're seen as structural bookends that were probably put in place by those who edited. So, one of the things that occurred to me that we've talked about a lot in here is who wrote it and who edited it. There's differences. We can say someone wrote it, but even if Solomon wrote a lot of the Proverbs, he didn't put them all together. That's somebody else's job. Solomon was the king. They didn't do that. So when we talk about when it was compiled, that's the work of editors. I mean, we do that with books today, someone writes it and then the editors come in and.
Sure, and rewrite.
Rewrite, yeah, change it, so.
Yeah.
But that's what we have here, but so the 1 through 9 and 31 are, structural bookends. 1 through 9 sets the stage for the quest of wisdom and emphasizes that finding wisdom is inseparable from the fear of the Lord. And we'll talk more about that because we had a worksheet that looked at that. The final form of the book dates to the post-exilic period, probably sometime between 539 and 337 BC, when there was a need in the post-exile to regain their way of life and to remember all these little pieces of wisdom that made them who they were. There were 6 collections identified. And as you read through, you would have seen these in certain places. 1 through 9 are said to be the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. That's the first set. And then 10 through 22 are the Proverbs of Solomon. And then 22:17 to 24:14 begins with the words of the wise. So we don't know who those are from, but someone who was wise. Then 25 through 39, it says, these also are Proverbs of Solomon that the officials of King Hezekiah of Judah copied. So there must have been some words they found somewhere else, or they got from a different source. And then 30 says the words of Agur, son of Jacob, which is an oracle. So, and then 31 says the words of King Lemuel. So there's 6 different collections that have been collected into this book that we have.
Do we think that Lemuel was Solomon?
I didn't see anything, I haven't heard that or seen that. I don't know who Lemuel was, but whether
Lemuel.
the words of King Lemuel, who that was, I don't know.
I've never read about him in
I
any.
haven't read about it,
That's
either, so I'm gonna look at it, I don't know.
Solomon.
But the words of King Lemuel is the one that says an oracle that his mother taught him. So, it may have just been a wisdom source that was there. And then 31 is a unique acrostic poem, which of course the Woman of Worth, which we know. So, and that some people see it as part of what was in the words of King Lemuel, or just something that was around that they tacked onto the end of, we don't know. Your first worksheet was to talk about your favorite proverbs. Tell me some of your favorite proverbs.
Trust the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight. 3, 5, and 6. Have that forever.
I put gray hair as a crown of splendor.
Yeah.
It's just light.
I like a soft answer turns away wrath, but a hard word stirs up anger.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
1517, which was better as a dinner of vegetables where love is than fatted ox and hatred with it.
Like 24:13 and 14, wisdom is like honey. If you find it, you will find a future, and your hope will not be cut off.
Ooh.
Also like all the triple heart ones, 15 and 17. So.
Like 12:15, fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to
Sometimes we
advice.
do.
Yep.
That's right, they did.
You mean that's wrong?
Yeah, I had one that actually seemed kind of modern. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing personal opinions.
Smiley face by that one.
And Proverbs 7, keep my commandments and live keep my teachings as the apple of your eye. And then the one about in 6, my child, keep your father's commandment, do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them upon your heart always, tie them around your neck.
And the honest answer is like a kiss on the lips. There aren't too many of those around, honestly.
Bring up the child.
Well, in 16:9 says the human mind plans the way, but the Lord directs the steps.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that was just a way for y'all to identify the ones that mean something to you for one reason or another. All right, there were 2 worksheets to reflect that, look at the first collection of 1 through 9, because I thought that was a really important set of proverbs. In worksheet 2, you looked at the first 3 chapters, which provide just kind of general information about wisdom and its purpose. And I asked you the question of what was the purpose of the Proverbs found in 1, 2 through 6. It said for learning about wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for gaining instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity, to teach shrewdness to the simple, knowledge and prudence to young, that the wise also hear and gain in learning, and the discerning acquire skill, and to understand a proverb and a figure, the word of the wise and their riddles. So you get a sense of the what's involved in that. The emphasis was that wisdom is to be learned and learned in community. So wisdom is practical knowledge, instruction from a father to a child, or most likely a son, and learning about righteousness, justice, and equity. And then what did Proverbs 1:7 say?
Fear the Lord.
In the beginning of knowledge, fools despise wisdom and instruction. Remember, fear is reverence, awe, and wonder before the all-wise fear. It's not fear,
Scary
it's
fear.
not the scary fear, it's awe and wonder. It emphasizes the worldview that acknowledges the sovereignty of the holy and the dependence and limitation of human beings. So acquiring wisdom is not a human self-help project, but it's a creaturely response to the fearsome, gracious, and wise presence of God. So knowing and fearing God requires a reorientation of all of your life. And that's what the wisdom is hoping to do, is to help you to reorient it. The Proverbs say that fools are those who don't understand the importance of wisdom and instruction or learning. It's interesting, the words fear of the Lord are used 10 times in the book. And I had you look up the 5 addition times that are stated the fear of the Lord is. What'd you discover? What is the fear of the Lord?
Hatred of evil,
Yeah.
beginning of wisdom, life itself. And instruction and wisdom.
Rest secures.
And suffers no harm. Does that sound like something you desire?
Yeah.
Okay, the concept of the fear of the Lord is also found 4 other times in Proverbs. In Proverbs 1:28 through 29, it says, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. So it's a kind of a swap around of the other ones that say that. And then in Proverbs 2:1 through 5, there are 3 if statements, which are expectations. My child, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments within you. And then if you indeed cry for insight, and if you seek it like silver and search for it, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. What words of Jesus do those statements remind you of?
You seek.
Huh?
If you seek and you shall. Seek, you shall.
Ask and it will be given to you, knock and then the door will be open to you. Search and you will find. So, he was taking an Old Testament wisdom passage and reinterpreting it. And then in Proverbs 3:7, it says, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Oh, darn. So you can't say, look at me, I'm wise. It's not quite what it's really was. And then, of course, in Proverbs 31:30, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. In Proverbs 2:6-3:2, it talks about how God provides wisdom, and this is what will guide and protect you. And there were lots of specifics given. What were the warnings given in Proverbs 2:16-19?
It will protect you from lascivious behavior.
Yes.
That's a hard word to spell. Good to say. Yeah.
And that theme comes up over and over and over again in
Yeah.
Proverbs. It's always been an issue, y'all.
It's just funny that it's Solomon that's admonishing us about it.
Yeah,
Your house may not be one of his.
It's one of his issues.
Well, we don't know whether it was early on in his life that he had those proverbs, or if it was later when he was doing all that massing of other cultures by marrying other women.
But maybe after he experienced the consequences, he's like, this is an issue.
You know what my mama told me?
Believe it now.
Well, in 4, 5, and 6, he gives a lot of examples of, things that go around parental advice and keep to the right path, warnings about loose women, and examples of unwise behavior, and more warnings about women and infidelity. So basically, the instructions are to walk in the way of the good, follow the wisdom that's provided. And then Proverbs 3 goes on to continue teaching, not to forget the Lord's teachings. And he says, and to bind them around their neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. Now, I wanted you to remember that the context of where that goes back to. What does it go back to?
The priests stuff.
The phylacteries and where they actually took the commandments and put them in those and wore them on their head or on their arms as a reminder of what those commandments said. So when they say, that means don't ever forget it. Keep it somewhere where you will remember it forever. And it comes from the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. The Lord alone, you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, basic commandment.
So if we see Hasidic Jews at the Wailing Wall and they have this block on their head,
That's what it is.
that is a commandment.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Isn't that what they put on their doors too?
And
I forget what it's called. Yeah, mezuzah, yeah.
It's on the door where they keep a commandment. That's that is to be there so that every time they walk in the house, they will touch it or remember. And in the process, they remember those commandments that were given. And the Shema is what's usually in the Deuteronomy 6, 4-9.
And when they wrap their arms and put the box on here too.
Kind of like the stones being their stories and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why every time you see that, that's not just saying, put a ring around your arm. It's reminding them of that covenant promise from the Moses' days, the Shema. So it's, that's where this connection back to what you know about the Old Testament makes that proverb more powerful for us. And it's mentioned again in Proverbs 6 and Proverbs 7, that same mention of the right of on your heart. So the result will be to find favor and good repute in the sight of God and the people. And that is the context in which that famous proverb, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own insight. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. That's the context of that. So it's in the context of remembering that Shema, which is the commandment to love. Any other thoughts or questions on that worksheet? All right, the third worksheet looked at woman wisdom because that's important in the understanding of Proverbs. In wisdom literature, wisdom is personified as a woman, a wise woman. And that's because the Hebrew word for wisdom is a feminine noun. It may come from the role of women as sages or the role of teachers in the household, we don't know. But the word wisdom is a feminine noun in Hebrew. And I called your attention to the pronouns that you would see in those 5 passages that we read, because they're all feminine pronouns, if you notice. So these 4 poems are recognized as woman wisdom, and we looked at them. 1, 20 to 33, 3, 8, and 9, and then I added the capable woman one because I didn't have anywhere else to put it.
That makes sense.
In the context. But Proverbs 1, 20 through 33 was the call of wisdom, and it was a warning about the consequences of rejecting wisdom's teachings. Wisdom is seen as the voice of God who reveals the divine character and will in creation and in her teaching. And she embodies the wisdom tradition that finds its authentication in the insights of the servants of Israel's past and present. And where did wisdom speak?
The streets, the markets, Babylon, everywhere.
In all the public places.
And it is the public places. It doesn't say in the synagogue.
That's right, it's in the public places. But and the role of wisdom was to call out the lack of faith, their frailties, the things they've done wrong. But it ends with that assurance. Those who listen to me will be secure and will live at ease without dread of disaster. So the promise of the one. Then the second one, Proverbs 3, 13 through 20, is about finding God's wisdom. Finding wisdom in happiness and understanding, long life, riches and honor, pleasure and peace. What was the Old Testament story that you saw mentioned?
Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden, tree of life. What was the role of the tree of life?
Knowledge.
The tree of life.
Knowledge is good.
Good knowledge of good and evil. So, that's that connection, and it also referred to creation and the establishing heaven. So it takes you back to that. Here again, when you know the whole of Scripture, you see things like that when you read parts. And then Proverbs 8, 1 through 36 was personified wisdom, and she lists her gifts. And once again, Lady Wisdom calls from public places. On the heights, beside the way, off the road, crossroads, beside the gate in the front of the town, is the entrance to the portals, and encourages them to learn prudence, wisdom, and truth, knowledge, intellect, discretion. The result is the walk in the way of righteousness along the paths of justice. Wisdom was created first. Did you notice that? Most important. It says it's rejoicing with Lord at all creation and to follow God's ways, and then you'll be happy.
Another name for Jesus.
Huh?
It's another name for Jesus. Because the wisdom of God.
And it says you will find life and obtain favor from the Lord. Well, you see how as Jesus came around and we heard it, then Old Testament, knowledge has been applied to Jesus in terms of that. And then Proverbs 9, personified wisdom, speaks again and invites people to dine with her. You know this, come, eat of my bread, drink of the wine I have mixed, live and walk in the way of insight. The idea of bread and wine was not new. Corrects those who are wrong and gives instruction to wise. And what was the role of the foolish woman?
Ignorant.
Knows nothing. Sits at the door of the house inviting people in. So soliciting. Now, you're all very familiar with the acrostic of the description of the capable woman. I think that's probably one of the more known passages from Proverbs. How is the woman described?
Precious and jewels, hardworking, opens her hands to the poor and the needy.
Trustworthy.
Provides food for her household.
They're strong.
Children speak highly of her, to be praised. And ultimately is a woman who fears the Lord. One commentator has noted that the two female personifications of wisdom that frame the beginning and end of Proverbs chart a pedagogical journey that extends across the whole book. The reader starts as a child in the parental home and is called to claim woman wisdom as sister and friend, and the reader finishes as an adult living in a wise woman's household. That's an interesting thought. And it's interesting that it's all the men who collected these, but they talked about the woman wisdom and the importance of that. So, I think we sometimes think because it was a patriarchal world that the women didn't have a role, but they did. Clearly, their role in the household was very important in terms of what went on over there. Any thoughts about the woman wisdom? That's probably not new to you, that concept of woman wisdom.
All you have to do is meet a couple of Jewish mothers and realize it's very substantial.
Well, even societies that didn't have these, this beginning would consider the woman, the wise, they would have wise women.
Right.
It just seems to be a very societal thing for the woman to carry the wisdom.
And pass it along and make sure the kids.
Well, all of it's supposed to nurture the next generation, definitely part of it. All right, the second collection of Proverbs from Solomon is that big section 10 through 22, and it contains 375 self-contained proverbs. Trying to look at that, I couldn't figure out how to help y'all look at those. So worksheets 4 and 5 was just a way for you to look at some of those. Worksheet 4 looked at different types of proverbs, the antithetical and the synonymous. Any observations as you look those up?
There are literary formulas today to use this kind of thing in your writing to make a point, because it structures things for readers or hearers.
Very much. That comparison or likeness helps us to think about something in different ways, and that's what we find in the Proverbs.
Well, it also helps with memorization.
Yes.
Okay, this is trivial. The one thing that kept jumping out at me was the use of the word mocker. They use that a lot to, which I guess is just, you're better than the other people. Is that
Probably.
what you're trying to say?
Obviously, that must have been an issue, just like the
Yeah.
issue of infidelity that you see over and over. You can tell that those were issues
Yeah.
in that time because they keep coming up, coming up.
In my slightly older translation,
Yeah.
it's scoffer.
Yeah, mine too. I was like,
Walker,
I don't
Sorry. There's by
Yeah, we have
standard
the same-
updated, whatever, that they call it. Number.
Here's his NRV, this is NRSV, still has scupper.
No, well, this is an older
Standard, American standard.
and yeah. Revised standard.
That's when it's interesting to look something up in multiple translations and see how they translate different words.
It's not like a app or.
Right.
Oh.
All right, the worksheet 5, I had you to trace the theme of righteousness, justice, and equity. I also thought this was interesting. That theme was addressed in the very beginning, in the very first Proverbs 1:3. It was one of those statements. And it's found, I just, as I was reading, I kept seeing it over and over and over again. It's important to know the difference in those 3 words. Righteousness is about having a right relationship with God or being morally right is what, when they talk about righteousness being, based on God's intentions. Justice is just treatment, behavior or treatment of others. Kind of respect for all, the upholding of laws and holding people accountable is what they mean biblically by justice. And then equity is fairness, being sure that everyone has access to the same thing. So in many of these cases, those 3 words are linked. Righteousness, so your relationship with God, but also justice, so your relationship with other people. And then the fairness of all of what you do. Is part of, what did you see as you trace those words through the Proverbs?
If we would just be kind, be fair,
Imagine.
life would be a whole lot better.
And be real inheritance and a treasure at the end of it.
Reward.
The reward
Yeah.
comes from acting and living that way. Yes,
And it delivers you from there.
yes.
And then guards your ways.
The Proverbs 21, in our eyes, your way is right, but the Lord sees the heart. So what we see may not really be what's going on.
And I think it is somewhere in Proverbs where it's saying God sees everything. I forget now where it was. I might have circled it.
It's interesting too, Proverbs 21:2-3. 3 says, to do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. And from a culture that sacrifice was so important to, that we may think, oh, well, we don't do sacrifice, so that's not really applying to us. But what it's saying is the way you live and the way you treat your relationship with God and your relationship with other people is more important to God than anything you offer to us, because your life being offered to Him, which is really what Christ said. It's giving up your life for Him.
So often in these, that they point straight to what Jesus taught about. And also with the later world, Micah and Amos. talks about.
Well, that's the reminder that in the Judaism that Jesus grew up in, these were basic understandings. They, you know, this was wisdom of the time and the world that he grew up in. So much of, his application in parables and other things comes from the wisdom of life as a Israelite, life as follower of God.
That's why Matthew 6:33 quoted 21:21. What do you pursue? What do you seek first? Kingdom and his righteousness and love. Yeah.
So those words are important throughout scripture, but I thought they were interesting in this context in particular.
I thought those last three were really pertinent to government. And it seems to explain a lot. The evil do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. So many people don't seek the Lord in any of their behaviors. And by justice, a king gives stability to the land. But the one who makes heavy extractions ruins it. I think of our national parks, I mean, as physical extractions and what's going on. And justice comes from the Lord, not the ruler. And we have postings of people trying to make themselves look like Jesus. It's overwhelming.
These are true, I mean, they apply in every generation.
Yes,
And
that's the
we
power
have
of
the
wisdom.
same problems with government
Over and over and over.
that have always existed when they follow their own goals instead of righteousness and justice.
That's, you know, another reason why, you know, the whole Old Testament is important, because it's the basis for everything Jesus taught. And when you know it, you begin to see how it's the basis of it. And then it matters. Okay, I just thought that was a way for y'all to begin to look at that and see. And then the last worksheet on Proverbs was on the use in the New Testament. And there were a couple, one was from Paul, one from Hebrews, James, and 1st and 2nd Peter, which is interesting. It's toward the end. But those were the practical books on applying the faith. So that makes sense that it would be the ones that he would pick up on it. The Romans one, Paul is talking about presenting your bodies as living sacrifices and being transformed, that you can discern the will of God. So the way to live as a Christian. And so he contrasts the phrase, vengeance is mine, I will repay, which are words from Deuteronomy, by showing that wisdom had changed through the ages. He said, instead, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. Instead, if they're thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their head. And Proverbs said the same thing. If your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat. If they're thirsty, give them water to drink. For you will heap coals of fire on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. So he, you know, took the proverb and applied it.
No evil with good.
And then,
I like that one, the last one you gave us in 2nd Peter about a dog returns to its vomit and it's full. And then a saddle that is washed goes back to the mud pile. I thought that was pretty cute.
So fools repeat.
Yes, yeah.
I think as you looked at those, you saw the application and the different, it's just interesting the way they picked up, you know, different writers picked up different pieces of the Proverbs to look at.
I should have sent you this question, but I forgot over the weekend. So you don't have to answer it right now, but in in Proverbs 30, I quite like 30, if you read through it, because just some of the words, who has gathered the wind in the hollow of the hay, who has run back the water in the garment. But what I have a question on is, who ascended to heaven and come down? Does that refer to Jesus?
Well, when Proverbs was written, it was not referring to Jesus.
Right.
We might today make an
Apply it.
application to it, to Jesus in terms of that. What verse are you on?
It's 30 verse 4. I've not learned wisdom, nor have I knowledge of the holy ones, who has ascended to heaven and come down. And then it comes on, who has gathered the wind in the hollow of the hay, who has wrapped up the waters in the garment, who has established all the ends of the earth. What is the person's name? But you can look it up later. I should have sent it to you later.
It's kind of like all of prophecy in the Old Testament. I
Right.
mean, you
Yeah,
can pull the.
right,
sayings
you
out
can, and that's
read
what
it.
they, scholars did in the New Testament time, was what that to the Old Testament and took them. But, this, that's an application of a man who's, weary. I'm weary, oh God, how shall I prevail? So he's asking questions about things that have happened and asking God, does he know it? And
I'm sad.
yeah, I mean, it's a,
He's at a point where he feels like he knows nothing.
right. And we've been there sometime too, right? Many of us, that's a reality of it.
More and more.
This gets echoed in, at the end of Job.
Right, any takeaways from studying Proverbs? I'll look that up. Any takeaways from Proverbs?
It's almost like a checklist again.
Is what?
It's almost like a checklist again.
Well, it's practical wisdom, which is what James is. So you're right, it's similar.
You know, I taught Proverbs once in the Sunday school class, and I gave each person a saying and said, is it from Proverbs? Is it from Poor Richard's Almanac? Or is it from Aesop? And it was funny how the things we thought were maybe from Poor Richard was from, it was just interesting how there were so many.
Oh, Aesop's favorites are very
Yes.
much like
Yeah.
Proverbs.
And so is Richard's Almanac.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, Chris, that's a
Yeah.
great.
It was just a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
I think it helped the way you started out and had everyone do one and kind of chuckle about it. And there's too much condensed in here at once to appreciate it as a single work. And I do wonder if families got around the campfire and they were assessing a struggle of some kind and would find a specific proverb to discuss about it. And it's almost like, well, we give it short shrift. There's a lot of wisdom in these little pieces, and having them all together, it's kind of lost.
Well, and unlike a lot of the books we've read, when you read it straight through, you get a sense of the whole. But these are, each one is separate, so it is hard to, which is why I had a hard time figuring out the worksheets to figure out how to, help you to begin to look at some of those different ones. Because, you really kind of need to take one and ponder it every day, figure out.
Somebody said, was it you in a Sunday school class, that's what they did? They took one a week,
No, you
somebody
do that, don't you?
took like one a week and they would
Proverb
think
a day?
about it.
There we go.
and
Chapter a day, for the day,
A chapter of Proverbs.
chapter Proverbs a day, 1 through 31. It's like a calendar.
Okay.
So perfect.
That's what Roger did.
Read chapter 1 on day 1 and 30, and
We
if
just go back and read it
you
again.
get the February, you double up.
28, we do 28.
Yeah.
But it fits really nicely in the calendar, I mean, just read.
That's a lot, though.
It's a lot.
Proverbs are.
To really dwell
And that's why you kind of need to contemplate Proverbs. It's a little different. So it's just something you need to go back and read again,
Mm.
you know, and contemplate different ones of them.
You don't do the daily readings.
No, I'm not a biblical scholar that my husband is. No. Because that's nice and kind.
You follow.
Because that is why we are urged to be in scripture all the time, because you find sometimes what you're looking for in scripture.
We find pearls of wisdom everywhere.
Yeah.
when you're reading
Yeah,
it,
you're
seeing
right,
it.
you're right.
And the more you read, the more you pick up on words like abode, and how many times fear of the God is used, but it's like you were saying, it's not having a fear of God, but it's an awe of God. And I like your idea about reading
That's a good
Proverbs
idea.
every single week, one proverb chapter a day.
All right, let's go to Job, because I know we want to talk about Job.
Easier down the road.
Okay, it's believed that Job was composed over time, with most people believing that came into its final form just after the exile, when they had suffered greatly as a people. So, you know, it would have been would have spoken to them at that time. The oldest composition of it is believed to be the prose narratives. That's the folk tale that's found in Job 1 and 2, and then in 42, 7 through 17. Those are the prose sections. Was probably an oral tradition in wisdom literature trying to explain undeserved suffering of the faithful during the pre-exilic time. But the poetic dialogue is believed to have been written down during or shortly after the exile, early 6th century. And then the other two sections, which is chapter 28, which we'll talk about, and then 37, which is the Elihu narratives, might come from the Persian period after the exile. But anyway, it came into its final form sometime between the 6th and the 4th century BC.
Does it not read though that it was an oral tradition for much longer before?
Yes, exactly.
Say that again.
It reads like it was an oral tradition that goes way before the exile.
Yeah.
Particularly since there's no mention of Abraham or Jacob.
Right.
It almost sounds like it's coming from the same time as Melchizedek, at least to me.
I'm not sure it goes that far back, but it was a folk tradition and comes probably from an earlier time period. So, but it's believed to have been written by the sages who were primarily interested in right conduct, a disciplined way of life, with the assumption that faithful adherence to the teaching would bring prosperity and a long life. Now, while Proverbs taught the right way to live, Job questions why it's not enough to guarantee a blessed life, and asks the question why over and over. Why? And we do that still, don't we? It deals with questions. Why is there suffering and evil? Why do human beings survive in the midst of such evil? How do they respond to evil? Why do bad things happen to good people when God is thought to be the author of good only? That's the theodicy question that we have. Is God the creator of both good and bad for humanity? And what does the adversary have to do with it? That's the question of the origin of evil. And should we accept quietly the inevitable agonies the world brings us, or should we rail against the apparent injustice of it all? And basically, how do we react to suffering and tragedy? The real question is not why do bad things happen to good people, but can there be a human being of such incorruptible integrity toward God and people that not even the worst imaginable experiences of life are capable of shattering their faith and their desire to follow God?
Say that again.
Okay. Can there be a human being of such incorruptible integrity toward God and people, that not even the worst imaginable experiences of life are capable of shattering their faith in their desire to follow God. Which is what Job is an example of. Note that the answer in the book itself is yes, but it does still involve struggle and loss. Job is not patient. His suffering is real. His questions are all of our questions. We ask those same things. Note that Job teaches us that there is nothing wrong in questioning God. Because God hears us and is willing to dialogue with us. What Job is persistent and faithful. So when people talk of the patience of Job, that's not the right thing. You should say that Job is faithful. He's persistent and he's faithful. Now, wisdom in this book is that God is always with us, even when we struggle. And that's good news, folks. Job is outraged by innocent suffering, as we all are and should be, and he's uniquely righteous and blessed human being. It's interesting that Job is mentioned along with Noah and Daniel in Ezekiel, which you'll see next month when you look at Ezekiel. They are seen as the examples of faithfulness. Noah, Daniel, and Job. Individuals who saved others by their own righteousness is what Ezekiel talks about.
Faith healers would have an issue with all that.
Yes. But that's not what scripture says.
Right.
Yeah.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
Faith healers would have an issue with all this.
Yeah.
With, when you say all this, what do you mean? That, with Job's suffering?
With his question.
With the questioning and that faithfulness. That faithful will suffer.
Yeah.
The faithful will suffer.
Because they believe
They
that if
don't
you have
see-
enough faith, you will be healed.
And
How
you name it,
cruel.
you name it,
Yes, right,
well, I've heard several say, you name it and claim it.
right.
You do what?
Yeah,
About money,
the-
you can
the-
name it.
The 19th century, healings.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been told
Preachers.
I don't have enough faith. I'm sorry.
Oh, look, when Jesus healed the blind man, the Pharisees were saying that he must have done something wrong to be blind.
Oh.
Well,
yeah.
you hear that,
They
it's
still-
good too, from all
That's-
kinds of
that's
cultures, so
Yeah.
that's there.
It must have done something wrong. This wouldn't have happened.
Right.
I know there were a lot of worksheets to work through with Job, and they were very detailed, but I really wanted you to see two specific things as you work through them. I wanted you to see the issues raised by the friends, because I think we hear some of those same things from people today. So the things that friends raised were important because they're the very things we hear in our life today. But I also wanted you to see clearly Job's responses and God's responses, for they can be a guide for us when we face challenging times. And so I was trying to help you to see that in the worksheet, so I hope that helped you a little bit. In worksheet 7, the opening scene in the prologue is actually a courtroom scene. And where the Satan or the accuser challenges God. Now, it's important that you know that the Hebrew word that is translated the Satan means the adversary. Hebrew always places a definitive article, the Satan, before the word. Hasatan is the actual word in Hebrew, and it's translated Satan. But it's not a proper name. It's not capital S. It's a function. It describes a function or an office. The Satan, the accuser, the adversary. And here again, note that he is a member of the heavenly council. He's an angel in good standing, whose function was to investigate affairs on earth and report back to God. Therefore, what is revealed is a dialogue between earth and heaven. And that's what I wanted you to see in that first worksheet. The adversary is the one who suggests testing Job, not God. God did not test Job. The adversary tested Job. God always believed that Job would remain faithful. And he put a caveat on his agreement to test them. Now, I didn't include scenes 1 and 2 for brevity's sake. I was trying to cut it back a little bit. But Job 1, the first scene begins on earth, and we're introduced to the main character, which he says there once was a man in the land of Uz named Job. He was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. I hope you noticed you saw those phrases used several other times throughout Job. He was blessed. Now, he even offered sacrifice on behalf of his children in case they had sinned, trying to cover his bases. It's clear that Job was prosperous and had a good life. And then it shifts to heaven. The second scene is back in heaven, and this council is in session before God. And God questions the adversary and says, where have you been? Going to and fro, checking on human beings. Just what I'm supposed to be doing. And yes, God says, have you considered Job, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? And the adversary says, haven't you been protecting him? Let's see what happens if tragedy strikes. So here again, it's the adversary who says, let's make tragedy happen to him. And the Lord does agree. But note in verse 12, chapter 1, verse 12, it says, only do not stretch out your hand against him. So he didn't want anything to happen to Job. He made sure that nothing happened to Job. But he was, other than
Everything around him.
things that happen in life.
Yeah.
And then the third scene, which was the start of your worksheet, he's back on earth and to see what's happening and basically learn that Job lost everything. And he had a series of disasters, which sound horrible to us. But did you notice what he did in response?
Praise God. Praise God.
He worshiped God. He praised God. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then in Job 122, we're told, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. So he didn't accuse God of being the problem. Then you go back to the heavenly council again, and you're in heaven, and the Lord is questioning the adversary again about where he's been, and he says walking to and fro. And the Lord asks Satan if he had considered Job again, and describes Job as blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil, and he still persists in his integrity even after all that happened. And then the Satan responded, he says, let's see what happens when his body is attacked. Let's attack him physically with boils. And he says people will do anything to save their lives when their bodies are hurting. The Lord says, okay. But again, he says, spare his life. That's the second time he said that. You can push it, but you can't push it all the way. And then the fifth scene is back on earth, and the boils afflict Job's body, and Job itches the boils with clay pot shards and sits among the ashes. And his wife says, tell him to curse God and die. Give up. Real nice wife there, but
Yeah. That good woman.
With the woman with the telling me at that point.
then Job's response says, Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad? So Job's faith was stronger than his wife's. And we're told that Job did not sin with his lips again. And then we start this dialogue with some friends. Now, the dialogues are interesting, fascinating. The three friends come in and they try to console him, and the three friends are Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And the first thing they do is just sit with him for 7 days and 7 days. So that's good.
Those
Right?
are good friends.
You're thinking, okay, these are good guys. Then you have the dialogue. Then they start telling him what to do. The dialogue raises the issues for us about God's justice. And does God reward some and punish others based on actions? We still ask those questions today, don't we? And it's common in that day, and it's a common understanding today. And in Job 3, we've had the first time we hear from Job himself. After 7 long days and nights, he speaks and he says, "Why?" We hear his pain and his confusion, but he doesn't curse God, but he does question God. So it's okay to question, but not curse. There's rage and lament, cry of pain. And he does say it's better to have not lived at all than to suffer this way. You know, sometimes when we hurt really bad, we wonder, yeah, his pain is real. And we get that. And then Eliphaz speaks and he tries to instruct Job in the mysterious and just ways of God's providence in human affairs. And he says that these are the consequences of his actions. He says, "You're impatient. Be careful. You have no right to cry out to God because none of us can be righteous." Well, we do have a right to cry out to God. God can hear us. God can handle it. He says, "If I were you, I would just pray and seek God, not cry out in anger." And he says, then what's the point in asking why? God will save you in the end. But for Job to do what Eliphaz is recommending, then he has to say he's at fault. And Job is blameless. He has not done anything. And you know, it reminds us that we have a tendency to always want to know whose fault something is.
That's because we want control.
Exactly. And that's what we see here. And Eliphaz goes on and suggests in 5, 17, and 18 that God is motivated by something like tough love. We know all about tough love in today's world. But God is trying to make Job face the limits of his mortality and warn him of consequences. He questions, did God send this suffering on Job to shock him into greater faithfulness? And the answer, of course, is no, God doesn't work that way. But then Job responds. Did you notice that Job's responses are always almost twice the length of what the friends say? So he has a lot to say about what they say to him. But in this point, he yearns for death, relief, because he becomes he's looking for relief before he becomes unfaithful. He accuses his friends of not standing with him, being faithful to him. He says they're afraid of the same things that are happening to him.
They're blaming him and they're blaming God.
Exactly.
He basically says, you know, with friends like you, who needs enemies?
That's what he said.
And Job says, "But I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to admit something that I didn't do."
I just find it hard for him to say that he's righteous, though. I mean, I get it that he says I didn't do anything wrong, but who can actually, I mean, can you? I couldn't say that. I mean,
I shouldn't say that.
yeah, I mean,
But in his eyes, in the argument, he's saying, I have stayed faithful. And that's what he means by being
And we're
righteous.
entitled to think that, because even God endorses him at the end.
Right, Well, you have to remember in all of this, that at the beginning, we're told that he is blameless. And at the end, that's confirmed.
Yeah.
So this is the struggle in between. So we know that he's blameless. And he did not do it. You know, as you read it, you start thinking, well, wasn't he? Was he really that blameless?
Well,
Was
it's
he,
not
you know?
it's not that I don't think it, I just think that's pretty haughty for him to think, you know, I mean, I just,
But I think-
every human being has sinned. It just,
Yeah, I think if you go through suffering, you go through that in your mind because you go and say, hey, God, but I've been living right. Why is this happening? I think it's a conversation that he's having with God, to almost like a prayer with God, to say, hey, I was okay. What happened?
Well, and it's also the reminder that we've read the whole book of Lamentations. Was these same kind of laments about what happens, and the Psalms that were laments. You know, that those conversations with God that show the pouring out of your soul was part of the world.
right.
And I think sometimes we're afraid to do that today because we think it means that there's a lack of faith. But I think the truth is, that's when we have the deeper relationship with God, that we're free to say, we got questions, we don't understand. And if you think back in the Old Testament, you know, Moses questioned God at different times and asked God to change his mind and do other things. You know, there are examples all the way through scripture that if you take the time to have a conversation with God, it might turn out a little different.
And but there was also the teaching in the early times that it was your righteousness that earned your way to heaven, and not God's grace. And so it's Job is kind of pointing forward to saying, well, but I have lived a righteous life. You know, will I yet be saved? And so it points to what we now know is the answer is yes, through Jesus.
I think the book of Proverbs has been over appreciated, I guess, in the sense that,
You mean Job?
no, the book of Proverbs
Okay.
has preconditioned us to think that the good person gets good
Oh,
results
gotcha.
and the bad person gets the bad results. And
The wisdom of Proverbs, correct.
Yeah.
and so there's this whole, and the same thing, you know, comes down to the time of Jesus too, is like, he must have been the wrong guy, because look what happened to him.
Yeah.
And Job is trying to tell us that we're not working the formula right. That, well, if you go to Micah has that short phrase, what does God require? That you do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So, but justice is the thing you do. Justice is the thing, so when you read Proverbs, are you that guy that is doing the wrong thing? And you gotta change but there's so much in here where I just wish there's just a little more schadenfreude for everybody, that the bad thing happens to the bad person. I could feel so much better about it. And if bad things happen to you, Joe, I mean, you're my buddy and everything, but you must have screwed up. You know? It's an unfortunate human reaction, which we always have to blame someone.
Well, we want it to make sense.
Sure.
Because we want to have some sort of control, because if this, then that. If that person did bad, then I can prevent it from happening to me. That's the control part of it.
And that's the control, and if you have those conditions met, then you don't need God.
Right, exactly.
Well, Job is really the foreshadowing of the person of Jesus.
Right.
Job is not divine.
That's why it's.
It is, a lot is asked of him. And he endures. Even more is asked of Jesus, obviously. And in our tradition, the suffering endured by Jesus becomes a holy thing, so that the next person that suffers unjustly can take that experience and say, I will use it to identify with the pains of Jesus. That it's not a meaningless thing for it to happen to me because it happened to the Son of God. And Job isn't quite there yet, but that's like the next thing for us in the New Testament age.
Back in the time when Proverbs were written, did they see them as promises versus principles?
No, I think they saw them as instruction. I don't think they thought of promises in the same way we think of promises.
Guarantees.
Right.
If I do this, then this is gonna happen.
Well, in some of the proverbs maybe, but in general, I think the wisdom was instruction very clearly for them. So I think it was more than.
Can I, say a word in defense of the Friends? I mean, did you think so? Okay. This part of the Bible, I mean, they knew what was good. They knew this part of the Bible. And what's it filled with? God doing things to get their attention because they've been banned. Okay?
It's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
they've been studying all the
You're
time
right.
in
Yeah.
here that they wandered for 40 something years because
Yeah,
they
they
weren't
did.
doing the right thing. So why wouldn't they think this wasn't just another one of those stories?
Well, and they didn't
Great
know
point.
that God was blameless. We
Right.
know that, we know that as the
Yeah.
readers, because we're told that
They
at the
didn't.
beginning, but they didn't. And they, in their culture, they assumed that they. had
You
done
must have done something wrong. You may not remember.
Which is why I said, their messages are important, because they're the same things we hear from people. And so being able to understand that they're not, that, there's nothing new under the sun, that the issues are still the same that come up, that that we think the same way and we are part of that. But that's also why Job's answers are so important, because he offers a different side of the way he perceives what is happening. And I think give us some instructions about how we might see how we deal with our own suffering. He doesn't, it's painful. He doesn't like it. He doesn't say it's not a rosy outlook in any way, shape, or form.
But this too will pass.
But I love the way he goes off in some tangents about creation and other things and the process of his responses, because it's where he remembers who God is. And I think that's part of what we do when we struggle, is when we can remember the bigger picture sometimes.
And we need to remember Abel. That he was a just man that did not have a just ending. And there's the 11th son, Joseph.
Right.
And he didn't get, it works out for him, but also works out for Job. Who else? Noah is ridiculed. Works out for him, but it doesn't always.
It was his world.
We're not promised a perfect life by having faith in God. And I think that's some of the wisdom of Job, that there is pain and suffering, and that's what, I think is being mentioned there.
Wasn't there some discussion whether or not to include Job in the Bible at some
like
point
we're
in time?
about a lot of them,
Yeah.
and that's why but it is wisdom in that it tells us how to deal with suffering, and what is part there.
I do take comfort in that Job asked God a whole bunch of questions and he basically says, I don't like this. This is.
But just think, if something happens to you and your friends come to give you advice, 3 different friends, and well, you should have or would have or whatever, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You're gonna answer differently than what they've told you. And especially if they say it's God's will. You know, then you're
Well,
really-
the other issue that comes up over and over in here, which I think we have to remember, is that what Job wants is a day before God. He wants a chance to make his case before God. Because he wants to be able to say his own piece. And we see that, especially in the second cycle, when we go,
Yeah.
that, he begins to say, what's important is having my day in front of God. And I think we all want that. Now, we talk a lot about what's gonna happen on the judgment day when we, get to the pearly gates, but we tend to talk about it being a, judgment day and those kind of things, but is it our day to stand before God? And, I have a good friend who said to me one time, I've got lots of questions for God.
Oh, I got a
I'll see God
list.
face to face. And I think that's what Job is saying. I want to have that day in front of God and say, I don't understand. And we see that played out as we go through the book. And, the cycles push him and he keeps saying that in the second and the third cycles, he responds. But I want us to look specifically at the second cycle of dialogue in worksheet, your worksheet 9 with Job 15, 16, 17 through 20. You go back and forth between Eliphaz and Job and Bilhah. But Job 19 in particular, 19:1 through 29, Job finally gets really frustrated and kind of says, stop tormenting me. And he sees his friends as enemies and he's kind of in utter despair. But he asks them for pity and he says, because the hand of God has touched me. So he still feels that God is with him in the midst of his suffering. And then he makes a plea and wishes that his words were written down. But that's where another of the most famous verses from Job sits, is in the middle of that section. And that's the context. Job is in utter despair, but he does believe that the hand of God has touched him. And that's the context when he says, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, and my eyes shall behold and know not another. My heart faints within me. Now Handel picked those words up in the Messiah and applied them to Christ. But what do those words mean in the original context? What does Job say?
God never leaves me nor forsakes me.
I feel the hand of God on me, touching me, even in the midst of my struggle. And so I know that he is with me, even in the midst of this.
Despite all the things I don't know.
Exactly.
He prefers them to carry on.
I still want to ask him all these things when I
Don't
get
let my
there.
answers, please.
But I want a chance to do that, but I still know that God is with me.
And that's true faith.
That is true faith. That is
amazing.
knowing that God is there with him. And he does believe that he will have his day in court before God and will prevail. Because he believes God will be on his side. And he'll acknowledge that what happened to Job was not right. He doesn't say, wouldn't have taken it away, but I think it's part of what, just remembering that, and I said this earlier, but just because we are Christian, just because we believe in God and in Jesus Christ, there are no promises in this life that our life will be easy and simple. We know enough about culture, we know enough about the human body today to know that things go down, that we have illnesses, that there are things that happen to us in the process. So, that's a piece of it. In this, Then there's a third cycle of dialogue. And he contradicts what all his friends have said. And he says this, and he acknowledges that his issues are not really with the friends, but with God. And he then he says that there's nothing left of their answers, but they're all falsehoods. And then there actually are some questions by scholars about whether chapters 23 through 27 are actually Job's speeches or the friend's speeches. Who's really saying those things? But Job's issues are always ultimately with God and not with his friends. So what we have is the editor's decisions about who's speaking. So we just have to come and take that for what it is. But Job responds, and he feels that God has been inaccessible to him, and then also to the poor who need him. And he speaks some in chapter 23 and 24 about the absence of God. And you ever felt the sense of, but then he declares his faithfulness in 23:10 through 12. He knows the way that I take when he has tested me. I shall come out like God. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and have not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandments of his lips. I have treasured in my bosom the words of his mouth. Exactly. But he also acknowledges his fear of God, his standing in awe of him. And the question is, why did the innocent suffer and others thrive? And we still ask that. And then Bill Hell's question is, how can a mortal be righteous before God? Well, we still wonder that too. And then Job responds, and then there's this interesting Job 28. It's kind of a meditation on wisdom. It raises questions. Where shall wisdom be found? Where is the place of understanding? Basically, not with mortals. And then the next question, where then does wisdom come from, and where is the place of understanding? And the answer is, it's hidden from the eyes of all living, but God understands, sees all because God created it all. And then the proverb that we talked about appears in Job. In verse 28. Truly the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. So, you see the wisdom there. And remember that how Job has been describing from the beginning, one who feared God and turned away from evil. That's what lies at the root of his faithfulness to God. And then in 29 and 30, we have another speech by Job that's kind of a summary of his points. And in 29, he talks about all the life that he led before and how wonderful it was and how blessed it was and how everything happened. He talks about his relationship with God, the blessings of his family, the blessings in the field, public responsibilities, why his actions mattered. He was taking care of the poor, disenfranchised. He was living the life of faith and he was surrounded by those who honored him. Then Job 30 talks about his plunge into despair and all the things that happened to him. And that's his sense of God forsakenness. And we hear his human suffering. And then Job 31, he describes the state of his heart toward God and people before, during, and after that descent. And he raises the question in Job 31:2. What would be my portion from God above and my heritage from the Almighty on high? And he confirms a commitment to the way of life that he believes God always intended for him. And then there were these bunch of if clauses I had y'all look at, the issues that might be raised against him by God. These are the issues that are there. And I don't know if the way I did that helped you or not, but what I was trying to help you see were that the values that he saw that were important in his life of faith. The first Job 31:24-27 talks about valuing riches more than a relationship with God. The second set talked about cursing others and desiring evil toward them. The third set is not taking care of the land given by God. But I didn't start that right. The first one is actions that lead to personal advantage. I'm sorry. The second one is sexual impurity. The third one, 13-15, is cruelty to his slaves. And 16-23 is not caring for the poor and the needy. Have we heard these things anywhere before?
Yeah.
And then, the okay, got mixed up here. Then valuing riches more than a relationship with God, and then cursing others and desiring evil toward them, and then not taking care of the land is the last one of those. And then he cries out, "Oh, that I had one to hear me, Lord, answer me, and I will give you an account of my actions. I will defend myself." Here again, all this time he's been saying, let me stand before the Lord and make my case. And that's when I don't know what's going on. And then we have this weird insertion of Elihu's responses that just kind of are there. And what is it about Elihu? Who is he?
Really young.
He's the youngest.
He's an angry young man. He's angry at Job and his friends, and he says it 3 times. And it also says he was timid and afraid. So he was not like Job or his friends, but he clearly has been listening to all that's been going on. So he's, sitting around and he offers kind of a middle way. Says that everything that's been said has been inadequate, that God wouldn't do it this way. Like he would know. But yes. And in Job 33:8-12, he says, "You said you were innocent, but God is always right." Remember that God really is right, because Job is faithful, but that's not what he means. And the 3 friends are right, that God is trying to get you, he says, the 3 friends are right, God is trying to get you to repent. Goes on to say that he has perfect knowledge and he knows what God intends. It's a little arrogance of youth there, isn't it? That he knows what God intends. And then his final words are, he starts talking about the wondrous work of God, and can you do what God did and does, and you can't be God Almighty, and of course Job has never claimed he was. So then the Lord answers. This is the whirlwind. What does the whirlwind represent?
Holy Spirit.
This is the opposite. It's the presence of God in the midst of the whirlwind. Job gets just what he's been asking for. He gets an encounter with God. And God responds. He says Job's problem is words without knowledge. Then God answers Job's questions and gives him knowledge. What were the subjects he covered?
Where were you when I created the earth? Where were you?
It looked like a whole nother creation story,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
creation.
All of those things presented in there, all of those things. He talks about different, wild animals and the creation of them. And the answer basically is God is God and Job is not.
Yeah.
And there's some things that we will never understand.
I like to think of it as saying, I prefer that you carry on without having all the answers.
You know what faith is? We have to admit that there just are not answers to some things.
Yeah, you just feeling to accept it and trust God.
And Job's response is just sheer awe and wonder. He says, I can't say anything. God's heard him and responded and is answering him. And then the Lord responds again and questions whether Job was questioning God's actions in the world, and says, if so, you can reorder things. What would you do? And then he uses two examples. Now, they're monsters or beasts that you may or may not know much about, but they're chaos monsters of that time and age. Behemoth was believed to have been maybe a hippopotamus. So basically the land threat, the biggest animal. And then Leviathan was a crocodile. Probably a he was a sea monster in Canaanite myths. They both symbolize uncontrollable and terrifying power before which human beings stand utterly helpless. And the way that they are described reveals that God is still more powerful than they are. And then Job's second response, Job finds his voice and he's all that God has spoken and humbled, and says again that he's seen God face to face and survived. So what we know is that God has always been faithful to Job. He always had faith in Job. He believed that Job would stay faithful. God's heart towards Job and Job's heart toward God are free of its ulterior motives. And then we have this epilogue at the end. The epilogue, it's the friends who are the ones accused by God that they did not understand God, and therefore what did they have to do? They had to offer their possessions to restore Job's fortunes.
And get Job to pray for them.
Yes. And they did what God asked, and Job's fortunes were restored.
Twofold.
Yes. So ultimately, the question of the book of Job is whether even the most faithful, unimaginable person can maintain a life of integrity before God and people, when all the world's falling apart around them. And the answer is yes. And part of that is forgiving his friends for their own lack of faith in him. And that's a powerful message to people that have seen their world destroyed and were seeking to be faithful in the midst of so much pain and uncertainty. Think about the time post-exile when they lost everything, when this was there, that promise to the people. And it's a powerful moment for us when struggles come, that God will always be God and be faithful to us always. So how do you feel about Job after studying Job?
I did something weird. I went back and read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Where Screw Tape is trying to get his buddy Wormwood to get the guy.
He's a devil.
Yes, yes, and it's arguing, and then the guy always does the right thing. I haven't read it in a long time, but I just thought of that.
Oh, I haven't read that in years and years.
Yes, read it again.
I will. That's a great idea.
This time through is the first time I recognized that the children of Job might have been straying on the faith scale, and he was trying to supplement what might have been missing. Because there's a sense that, the dark prince is not, and we can be protected from the dark prince if we are in the right relationship with God. And his children, they end up dying, but I noticed it doesn't say they were in right relationship with God, that they had surrendered themselves to whatever the forces, what light and dark might be.
The story isn't really about the children. The story is about Job.
I always felt bad that, all right, God doesn't let him touch Job, but he really messes with Job's children.
I want to know where the other servants come from, because it says that it kills all the servants. And then all of a sudden he has all these servants around him. It's like,
It's kind of like, where did all the women come from in Noah's time to marry into the next generation? All right, let's talk a minute about Ezekiel and Daniel. It's another long lesson and, I apologize, but it's the reality of these two books. These are the last two major books of the Old Testament. It's important to remember the history of the last 600 years of the history of Israel before the time of Jesus to be able to understand these two prophetic books. And we'll review that as we work through it. I'll walk you through some of that history because the history explains some of what's being talked about in Ezekiel and Daniel. But both of these books, Ezekiel and Daniel's, use word pictures or visions. They're very, very descriptive. Ezekiel is the most visually descriptive and vision-oriented of the prophets. And Daniel also uses visions extensively and interprets others' visions. Now, there's somebody else in the Old Testament that interpreted Joseph, and you'll see some similarities there too. Ezekiel deals with the issues of the 6th century Judaism, which is during the exile in Babylon and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Much of what's been recounted before is remembered in this book. Remember that Moses and Ezekiel are remembered as the forerunners of Jesus. So the importance of Ezekiel is really important to understanding the Jesus story too. Ezekiel in particular is the third and last of the major prophets. We looked at Isaiah and Jeremiah, and we left Ezekiel to now because his language is a little more apocalyptic, and I thought it's important to do this now. But he prophesied for 22 years in the 6th century, from 593 to 571 BC. He was a Judean priest from the line of Zadokites. Probably grew up in the temple during the reforms of King Josiah. Now the Zadokites at the time of Ezekiel's deportation controlled the Israelites' high priesthood and held power in the Jerusalem temple. So he was in the first wave of those sent into exile in Babylon in 597 because the Zadokites were part of the leadership. And so a lot of information that you can see the temple influences are there. His prophecies fall into two parts. The first half predicted the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and the second half came after the destruction of the temple and spoke of renewed hope for the future and restoration of the temple. What we know most about are the hope and restoration passages. But it's important that you also see the other. There are 3 major sections. Chapters 1 through 24 are before the fall of Jerusalem and are prophecies of doom. You'll feel like you're reading some of the other prophets when you read those. And most of them are against the city of Judah, the city of Jerusalem, and against Judah. And then 25 through 35 are prophecies against foreign nations. We've seen that in other prophets. And then 33 through 48 are prophecies of hope and restoration. You got 4 worksheets. They deal with the first and third section mainly. There was too much to cover, and so I didn't really include the prophecies against the other nations. I left that piece out. Worksheet 1 looks at Ezekiel's call narrative, which is always important with the prophets. And it involves one of those visions that's very descriptive and challenging. And remember that it's a dream or a vision. And it's very hard to take it literally. Think about your own dreams. How much do you remember and how vivid are they? And as part of that. The second worksheet talks about the prophecies of Israel's destruction. There are reasons given, and there's repetition, and deals with many of those same issues. So as I said, I left out the middle section, and then worksheet 3 looks at the hope of restoration. That's a turning point in Ezekiel's message. And the word came from Jerusalem, that Jerusalem had fallen. And the message turns to hope for the future, once Jerusalem is fallen. And that's where you find the passages about the good and the bad shepherds and the valley of the dry bones, which are very familiar passages to us. We'll look at those. And then worksheet 4 is a vision of the new temple. Now, if you wondered why there are all those instructions back in there about the tabernacle and then about the temple being built, well, you're going to see it again in Ezekiel, where you see the connections, and you'll read some of those parts and say, oh, we've read some of this before. And as you work through that worksheet, note the role that God plays in the rebuilding. The temple was rebuilt between 520 and 516 BC. So we see this prophecy being fulfilled later in the history of Israel. So this is not the actual rebuilding of it, but this is the vision of what it's going to look like. And then that happens. So why do we have the prophecies written down? Because they happened. And this is an example of that. This is that prophecy came into existence. And so, but there's a lot of the history remembered again in Ezekiel. Daniel was probably composed and edited in the late Persian period, which would have been 450 to 333 BC, or the early Hellenistic period. It's some people dated all the way from 539 to 167. So, but it's believed to be the latest book edited into the final form in the Old Testament. Probably around 165 to 167 to 165 BC. Here again, it's important to know some of the history of what happens in that time, and we'll talk more about the history of those last 400 years of Israel's history next month, which we really haven't covered much in any of the other things that we'll do, but we'll talk about that. The first 6 chapters of Daniel come from the end of the Babylonian captivity to the reign of Cyrus of Persia. And then the rest covers history about what was to come next. Daniel is interesting in that it's written in Hebrew and Aramaic. And so Aramaic, of course, is the language that Jesus spoke, and we see in some of the New Testament passages. So Daniel is considered part of the prophetic books or the writings, but in the Hebrew Bible, it's in the writings, and in Christian Bibles, it's in the prophets. But it's really part of the apocalyptic literature that was popular between 200 and 100 AD, 200 BC to 100 AD. And apocalyptic means unveiling or revealing. And so we'll talk more about that kind of literature next month. And there are 2 major sections of Daniel. Chapters 1 through 6 are the wisdom tales. Those are the stories of Daniel and his friends. That's the ones we tell in Sunday school.
That's what you all,
Yeah,
you know.
I know that's.
And note, when you read those 6 chapters, that Daniel's friends appear in multiple of those stories, not just in the Meshach, but Meshach and Abednego, but fiery furnace story. But and
We've seen them.
yes.
We know these.
So worksheet 5 deals with those stories, and I want you to see the flow of those stories, because it really is a sequence to those 6 stories. And there's similarities to the Joseph narratives and to the Esther narratives. So think back on those 2 things as you work through those 6 chapters. In chapter 7, it shifts to visions that Daniel has about what's going to happen in the future. We'll talk again about the history of the period, because here again, these are prophecies and they happened, they came to be. And so that's why they're remembered as they are. Worksheet 6 looks at those 3 visions, and this prayer also included. And I want you to see how some other passages of scripture are involved in that. these are some of the visions that are referred to or alluded to in Revelation, which is the other reason why I kept this till the end, because I want that to be fresh in your mind when we do Revelation the next month. So I wanted this to be the last of the Old Testament overview. So, we have Ezekiel and Daniel next month, and then we have Revelation in June, and that'll be the end of our study. Wow.
Well, we we're almost
So,
did it.
so there are a lot of worksheets, and I apologize again, there's just a lot in this, but,
I will not.
pace yourself
Yeah.
so that you're, can get it all in.
Very good advice.
Oh, yeah, the job.
I have a really big ask and I don't, there aren't enough people here, but I'm not sure what you'll think, anybody will think about this. June, our last meeting, I will be